issue this morning that I had to address. So at this time, I'm going to ask Secretary Ms. Muhammad if she would please call the roll.
Senator Barrow.
Present.
Present. Dr. Birch. Present. Judge Green. Judge Guillory. Ms. Hadley. Present. Mr. Hanneman. Present. Dr. Hook. Present. Ms. Moody. Present. Captain Patu. Present. Honorable Russell. Present. Ms. Shelton. Present. Captain Sanji. Present. Dr. St. Germain. Present. Dr. Thurber. Present. Ms. Wascom. Present. We have 13 members present.
Thank you so much. At this time, the minutes are included, and I ask for approval of the minutes. Are they? I'm sorry. Okay. Never mind. I do want to remind everyone that if you need to take a phone call, if you would please step out of the room and take that call. I'm going to ask everyone to please silence their phones. If you're in the audience and you would like to provide testimony, please fill out one of the white cards and sign your signature on the back, affirming that the information that you will be providing is true. And at this time, we will go ahead and officially call the meeting to order. It is the task of this committee to actually come forth with some recommendations, which are included in your folder. And so we will start going through those, and I will lean a lot on staff today as they have been very instrumental in helping to create these recommendations for us. But before I do that, I have a few questions, and maybe I should wait till after we go through the recommendations, because I do have a few questions for the Department of Children and Family Services regarding some recent information that came to my attention relative to the death of children since January 1st. And I would like, so maybe I'm going to see what we have here that may actually provide maybe some solutions to address that, but certainly I have concerns. Okay, so Amanda, would you like to start? Okay.
All right, members, we have, there's a document in your folder that says Task Force on Child Abuse Investigation Processes Recommendations. So we're going to take these we kind of group them by category, so we'll take it one category at a time and then open it up to discussion and feedback from everyone.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, so the first is DCFS processes. So there was a lot of conversation about the requirement that reporters dual report to both the DCFS and law enforcement, and the concern that reports were falling through the cracks because of this requirement. And so one proposal is to establish DCFS as the central entity that would receive all reports of suspected child abuse and neglect. This would not prevent individuals from calling law enforcement or 911 in event of emergency where they needed immediate assistance. But instead of having someone call DCFS and then having DCFS suggest that the person also call law enforcement if they suspect that a crime has been committed, to require DCFS to accept those reports and then be responsible for getting the reports that require a dual referral or just referral to law enforcement. So another component of that would be, one suggestion that's been made is establishing regional law enforcement coordinators within DCFS. And this is something that I think just there's been a little conversation around, and y'all can continue to discuss, but maybe having some individuals that have a law enforcement background established in each of the DCFS regions that could help DCFS determine if a law enforcement referral is needed and help them determine the correct jurisdiction. The other thing is to strengthen requirements for reports made to law enforcement when you're notifying the reporter or the family to tell them, instead of that referral to law enforcement is made, telling them where it's been made, if there's ability to provide a case number or more information for the family to follow up on. And then separate from that issue, another issue that's come up is DCFS's response when a child is found in Louisiana that's in the custody of another state, if DCFS has the authority to hold that child in temporary custody until the other state can come retrieve the child. So one thought there was to give DCFS some specific authorization to assume temporary emergency custody until the other state. And that is it for the DCFS processes.
So do we want to do these each category at a time? Would that be easier? Okay, so if anybody have questions, please, because there's no questions at this time. I don't see any on the board. If you have any questions, this would be the time to ask those questions. And so, Captain Patu?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning. I just wanted to say a few words in support of, and kind of explain to all of us about the suggestion on law enforcement coordinators throughout DCFS, and to kind of explain that framework a little bit. So that suggestion is, it's basically, adding within DCFS a retired former law enforcement, someone who is well known in law enforcement community throughout the state in different areas. That person basically would be responsible for coordinating, making sure that DCFS, because they're a DCFS employee, making sure that DCFS has good contact information for the local law enforcement that's within that particular coordination area. Making sure that something that I've seen has been missing in or not consistent throughout the state, in that we have regular meetings between law enforcement and DCFS to ensure that information, that contact information is valid, and that information or sticking points are kind of being communicated backwards and forwards, and that person would be responsible for keeping those meetings and communicating that information. And then also, we see from time to time in the intake, in the hotline, where there are going to be questions of who's going to be the local law enforcement, the correct agency for this particular referral. And that person can be kind of contacted directly from the hotline for those folks working intake, and those questions can be determined. Is it going to be, just in Baton Rouge area, you have a particular area that's very difficult to determine if it's EBRSO, if it's Central PD, if it's Zachary PD, if it's Baker. There's sections like that throughout the state, and so those law enforcement coordinators would be a great person to determine who's that case for, and can kind of help facilitate that information. So just wanted to pass on to the rest of the group what that would entail.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And I had the opportunity to sit in briefly when you guys was discussing this, and it sounds like a good path forward in addressing it. And like you said, here in EBR, I know can be very kind of complicated. We kind of saw that with the report that we received in terms of like who got it, who received it, how many cases was still not even maybe processed.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I like the idea. I don't know if DCFS would like to comment because I know that y'all have been intimately involved in trying to work out the details of what that would look like.
Still want to work out the details, Senator, but putting law enforcement in our office is one of our concerns. And the concern being that we, are in the business of taking care of children, and we understand that law enforcement would come in to assist us with that. But we're wondering if that can't be done, and we think it can be done with technology, rather than putting a person into each region or into each office. So that's what we want to sit down and work this out going further. One of my biggest concerns with this is we eliminate the requirement for dual reporting. Mm-hmm. The problem with there is we don't have enforcement authority at DCFS. Law enforcement does. We need a court order to get to the home. Law enforcement can go straight in. So our concern would be, think about if we send over one of our workers and they're going into a life life-threatening situation, they have zero protection.
So let me ask you this question. If a call, so I'm assuming like when a call comes in, you guys would actually receive the report, and then if you determine that this needs to go to DCFS, can y'all just send them rather than sending the worker? Or it doesn't work that way.
What do you mean?
So you're talking about a situation when the call comes in, law enforcement. Yeah. Hmm?
I was just doubting I thought what you were saying, sending law enforcement instead of the worker.
Instead of the worker, that y'all could determine that y'all would determine that. Like when it comes in, you can determine that this may be something that law enforcement needs to be involved in.
I honestly think going forward that it's safer if we have the dual reporting so both know.
Okay. I know when we sat there in the room, it seemed like things were kind of bouncing around, then ended up seemingly coming back to you guys. Like it started off with y'all, then it goes to them, then comes back to y'all. It just seemed like we could have made this a better process. But Representative Edmiston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I'm late. I couldn't get in them during Capitol. But can somebody just quickly talk to me about that dual reporting? Because I think that's got something to do with it. Explain that to me, what we have here, eliminate requirement for dual reporting. Is that dual reporting to law enforcement and DCFS? And we're going to eliminate that and do what? Is that what we're talking about, pretty
Yes.
much? Okay, so,
Hold on, let me see if I can put it. Can we put everybody on? Okay. Captain, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so just going back from my memory from our different meetings, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, I think that recommendation probably was born out of testimony in which we had folks come and say that they called one entity but didn't know they had to call another, and I think that's where that kind of that recommendation came from, right? So on the side of, and specifically in that case, it was personnel, it was persons who were supposed to report to both, and so I guess the recommendation is to make DCFS the single point for all, so that the communication is clear as to who you have to, but I don't remember the details. If anyone else remembers specific details as to the issues it caused when they didn't report to one or the other, I don't remember.
I don't
those
remember the
specific
details of that.
but then, excuse me, but then out of that was born this person, and they're saying technology, but the person that would be retired law enforcement that could kind of, veer things where they needed to go. Is that, am I understanding you?
So I think this is two separate
Okay,
issues or separate
okay.
recommendations, if you will. I mean, they may have relevance to each other, but the law enforcement coordinators is a piece that would help, I guess, with communication, and it doesn't have anything to do with the reporting specifically. They might be able to answer some questions if the hotline has a question about something, but these are two different recommendations.
Yeah, but the law enforcement person, or however we're going to work it, would be able to kind of, I mean, this is just me, but route those situations that need to go to law enforcement, whereas maybe we wouldn't get there just with the DCFS worker.
I mean, theoretically, they could, if they were, if they were contacted by the hotline of like, hey, I have a question about this particular one, or if they had information that was something that came in that was, needed action quickly, or it needed some coordination with law enforcement, then they could also kind of help make sure. Ultimately,
That
the
seems like that would be
recommendation
helpful.
was a stopgap to, just to make sure that something doesn't fall through the cracks and keep that flow of communication going.
Yeah, because that was one of the big issues that I heard from testimony, is that things that really needed to be addressed by law enforcement really wasn't, for whatever reason. And so I think having the person, or you said technology, I don't know, but just having that closer person with law enforcement would make a difference in my mind.
I would state that I do agree And one of the things that we were concerned about, which brought about in part the bill, right, is the gap, the children that were falling through the crack. And it appears that we still have a crack where kids are still falling through,
Yeah, that's
because it's regarding the reporting process and who's taking the lead, and then if follow-up is done, because oftentimes it appears that that may not be good thorough follow-up. And when you look at EBR, where you have the multiple jurisdictions in terms of who picks up the case, sometimes it seems like it's possible, according to the report that I saw the other day.
Yep.
Yeah. Dr. Birch.
Um,
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that.
oh,
Put everybody back on.
thanks. All right, am I good?
Yes.
Okay. I do think the need for dual reporting, I was just sharing with a couple of folks on the panel, I had to redo my mandated reporter certification this week. And I took the pretest expecting to get a 100% because I know my stuff. And I missed the question about dual reporting. And I think there is not enough clarity around what the requirements are. And that leads to confusion on the part of reporters. And I think that confusion is where cases have the potential to fall through the cracks. And we've seen that in testimony here. And so I think that efficiency and clarity matter. And I think if you look at the recommendations across here, and not to skip around, but even we were talking about the need, like one of the recommendations is putting a DCFS employee in a CAC. What we're talking about is like relationships, right? Joint investigations. It's not just the technology of, yes, this got emailed, or yes, this like got flagged for somebody. It's the relationship of law enforcement and child welfare being able to go out together and act jointly in the best interest of the child. And so I think any place where we can promote relationship, get expertise central to the people doing the investigations and making sure that they have the expertise that they need, and then finding where we have some teeth to enforce what we put in place. Because, we talk a lot in the CAC space that we're a convener. We don't have any mechanism to enforce that law enforcement, that child welfare, do what they need to do. As a mental health provider, I can beg and plead and get the releases and make sure people know what is happening in a case, but I can't make sure that law enforcement goes out and checks on a kid that I believe to be in danger. And so those are some things that I think, as I look through this, how do we improve that joint investigation process and get it activated quickly? And I think we have to look at places where those relationships can coexist, whether it's through co-location, whether it's DCFS being located in law enforcement settings or vice versa, or in CAC settings, but we have to find where those relationships can activate quickly. So I know it's not super specific in terms of legislative recommendations, but I think when we talk about centralizing a reporting system, it feels critical in removing the lack of clarity that we have in terms of making sure cases get where they need to go, and then the people on the back end take action as it's supposed to happen.
No, I believe your comments actually solidifies the importance of that. And that's, I think, in part what we have seen, right? Some of the gaps that we have witnessed, that we've heard, I think that's what it goes back to. I totally agree with you. I believe Ms. Shelton?
I guess I'm a little confused why you think dual reporting is going to eliminate the ability for law officers can still accompany DCFS workers on their investigations. So I just was responding to your comment, Mr. Hanneman.
Well,
So I guess I think we've heard testimony of doctors, therapists, they get on the phone and they have to call DCFS. And then they get on the phone and they have to call law enforcement because they don't know who to report to make sure that they're doing their due diligence and their requirement by law. If we make it one place, but also have someone in that place that can determine what needs to go properly to law enforcement and get all that information, I think that would eliminate a lot of those things falling through the cracks and would kind of solidify how the reports are routed out. So I guess I'm confused.
well, I
with the
think
issue
our
with me.
concern is that you're going to take, are we really going to fix a problem by making us responsible for this? Is my question.
I mean,
I
I
think
think
so.
it makes
Solely on
sense to
us?
be housed there. I do. I think it makes sense, but I think you also bring in the commitment to technology helping is concerning to me. I think you need a person with law enforcement background who can say, you need to get jurisdiction, we need to make sure we have identifying information. This is a law enforcement referral. You're already sending law enforcement referrals.
Correct.
Like, we discussed that in that meeting.
Correct.
And a lot of them are incomplete. There's just simply not enough information for them to do anything, and that just ends. But if you have someone, they're all coming through the central location, and you have someone who's also employed by the agency who can help ensure that all the information is gathered that needs to be the law enforcement referral that you're already doing, I think it eliminates that issue. I know it is putting more on the agency. I understand that, but I think will make the mandatory report streamlined. It's not saying not a 911 call. If you get a 911 call, quick connect that to law enforcement. I don't think that's happening a lot. I haven't heard a lot of reports of intake getting 911 type calls. I think those people are still going to call 911. But if you need to be a mandatory reporter and you need to make a report, I know I got to call DCFS about this child being hurt, and they're going to make sure the proper people respond. They're going to figure that out for me. I think it makes sense.
I think it does, and I do want to say that I expect you guys to be the centralized place where all calls come in, because I think it'll be easier for us to be able to tell, to be able to ensure that they're being taken care of. I'm gonna give an example of what just recently happened, right? So the child that died as a result of starvation, they call 911. The family called 911 when the child wasn't, I guess, responding. Law enforcement went out. Then you guys went out. So I don't think it precludes that, but I think in terms of those cases where, for one thing, hearing from all the professionals who were unsure about who to make the call to, or having to, trying to ensure that these cases were actually given to the proper persons, some cases actually fell through the crack. And what I saw the other day was we seem like we still have that hole where we wasn't sure, because it it may have started with you guys or with law enforcement, then went to y'all, then went back to you guys, and then we don't know who followed up or if there was follow up. So, Representative Edmiston, you should be on, because everybody's on. She's not on.
So Brett, you were talking about responsibility, about the responsibility being on y'all. If it's not on y'all, right now it's on the caller to know whether or not they need to call law enforcement in addition. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's a problem. I just feel like the person who's on the other,
The sense of, unless it reached the level that we would connect law enforcement on that phone call.
right. And then you would do it. But if not, still placing it on, I'm just trying to envision somebody that's calling that is something's going on with them, and then we're having, mental health reporters saying they're not sure. I feel like if we don't have the caller as responsible, not saying that y'all need to have it, but somebody else besides the caller needs to be responsible for where that complaint or concern needs to go, to me. So maybe we could talk about who's going to be responsible, but not the caller. It's just, it's not working.
So if it's not DCFS, then who could it be?
I don't know. Unless law enforcement will want to take it on, but I don't see that. I feel like having the law enforcement person inside the whole scenario would make a difference to me. And what was your concern about that, Brett, about having the person?
Just concerns of having, first of all, having to put another person.
Inside your operation?
And because, we're talking about social workers and people that save children. And then bringing law enforcement in. I understand that, okay, we would define jurisdiction only as good as that person is who knows it. So that's a concern, because then it's going on that one person that's in the office. And I'm not, you understand, I'm not knocking anybody at work.
Right.
But what if that person is limited on jurisdiction knowledge? Then what good is that by putting that person in our office?
So,
Who did?
if I can respond to, I guess to address that, the the notion was, however we decide, or however it can be supported, it can be as far as all of the DCFS regions throughout the state, that each one of the regions has a law enforcement coordinator to act in that area and be knowledgeable in that area of the law enforcement agencies, of the contacts, of the processes, and then also being, communicating, how these processes need to be tweaked and be improved, for each region, or, that all of those coordinators are then, pushing up information to the top of DCFS in order to get an even better picture of how the relationship between law enforcement and DCFS and child abuse investigations are being run in Louisiana, and how we, ultimately, we have recommendations here, but there may be even better recommendations born from that kind of framework. I understand that it's going to take some effort to add on additional people, and supervise those folks, but I think they're going to have information that is going to be crucial to keeping things from falling through the cracks.
And can I just ask a question, or am I on?
Yes, you on.
So, Joe, so we're not talking about just one person. You're thinking, you're envisioning somebody in every region?
Correct. I am. So like, and so like, just from my perspective, and I'm not speaking for everyone here, but in my mind, when I think of law enforcement coordinators, I think of it, from my own experience, several years at the State Police EOC and working with GOSEP, and GOSEP has those regional coordinators.
Yes, they do.
That keep in touch with all of your Office of Emergency Preparedness directors,
Yeah.
and they make sure that they know what each other knows, and the information's being pushed up to GOSEP, and that's the kind of framework that I'm thinking in my mind. Not just one single person in the hotline, but you have people all throughout the field that can answer questions that the hotline may have for their particular areas. So.
I think that's a really good idea. I think we need to work on how we could make that fit for everybody.
I agree. Ms. Trapp, if I remember correctly, there is a system set up in other states, right? Something similar to this in other states. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am. Other states have where you just report to their comparable DCFS, and they don't have the requirement that you report to DCFS in some instances, in law enforcement in other instances.
Okay.
That it would be the central agency that routes those
We'll
calls.
make that call, yeah.
And I think we need to look at those models. I think we have looked at some of those to kind of maybe ease some of the concerns that the department may have. I don't think it becomes a burden on the department. I actually believe that eventually it makes things work better and more seamlessly. Maybe it would create less work because
To look at it too, because central intake is going to be central intake. And so what you're discussing is having people all over the state. That's changed. That central intake is now in Baton Rouge.
okay, so then the person that's working should have a relationship with people in other regions, right? So if the law enforcement person is working in in Baton Rouge, that does not mean that they're going to be limited to not be able to work with law enforcement somewhere else if they have questions. And Dr. Hook, I see that you are getting ready to press your button. Go ahead.
So I do agree that building these relationships would be beneficial, across the state. But one of the things that I keep hearing is that some of the reports that we're making to law enforcement don't have sufficient information. And I think that's what Assistant Secretary Hanneman is trying to say, that we get that information from intake when the caller calls in. So if we don't further investigate that family, or we don't accept and then we refer to law enforcement, it wouldn't go to the local office necessarily, to get additional information. So we do need to solve for that problem when we're thinking about how do we better collaborate, together, so that we're making sure that that initial information that we're getting is sufficient when we need to refer to law enforcement.
I think that's a good point. But I do believe that if other states are using this model, I think that we can actually glean from that and really bridge the gap that we currently still have. I think it's Ms. Sanjay. I'm sorry.
I guess I'm
Ms.
getting
Sanjay.
back to the dual reporting part of it. And so we're talking about, like, a school teacher is my biggest thing that I deal with mostly. So we're talking about them not calling us at all and going straight to DCFS?
Yes.
I mean, that's, to me, that loses time for me as a law enforcement officer. I'm losing hours. Because by the time it goes through intake, it's gonna take some time, it's gonna get through there, and then it's gonna come to me, and then we lost a whole day or half a day or something like that. I wanna know right there, ASAP, let me get on it. So I mean, that's the way, so what my people do at the schools is they call us, tell us what's going on. In the same process, they're doing their reporting to DCFS, but we're alerted so I can send somebody out ASAP. So we're not waiting for a report from DCFS. And I get that everybody doesn't work like that,
Yeah, that's what I was
and we're looking at everything, and then the dual.
Yes,
I
you
like-
guys are the
I
exception.
I mean, I'm not against going with the one, reporting thing. I like the dual, because I've kind of, in my parish, we walk over each other on it. Like, it's a good thing for us. They report it to us, they report it to them. If something happens with DCFS, we send it to DCFS. Half the time, they sending it to us at the same time we sending it to them. And then we go. If DCFS ever needs law enforcement, like even not my guys, if they want to go make a visit, they call patrol and they go make a visit. And then they call us to go if they need us further than that. I mean, can only speak for my parish, it works in my parish, the overlapping and all that stuff, and, it just works.
So Captain Sanjay, you mentioned that and jumping, law enforcement, getting that direct phone call from the mandatory reporter to get that information quicker to move on it. Dr. Hook, you also mentioned about information that's missing in some of these reports. I think we have a recommendation, but it's maybe further down where we talk about how we find out who made those reports possibly in order for law enforcement, and that maybe kind of can tie into right now. So do we want to discuss that one maybe, Senator?
Where is that, Amanda?
I think that's
Under mandatory reporters.
Oh, that's next.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Can I just?
Yeah, hold on.
jump in
Yeah,
before
so
you move
yeah, and we're not because we're not moving on, and you're not the only one. So let me take Dr. Birch and then Ms. Wascom.
Mr. Sanji, I love your point, and the need for immediate action is incredibly important. I think what we see is the delay you're talking about and the hours that are lost. Those are being absorbed by your reporters. And people are not making reports because it takes 2 hours to make a report. And if I'm a pediatrician in an ER, if I'm a teacher in a busy classroom and I'm weighing like, okay, I need to get out of my classroom and go make this report, and I'm going to sit on hold for 45 minutes, and then I've got to call law enforcement. And, we often hear like, yep, we have 24 hours to hand this over to law enforcement. And so those delays are happening, and I think that is something that as we plan for this, we absolutely need to account for. But I think we're losing reports because the process is so onerous that mandatory reporters are not always making reports because of how onerous we've made the process.
I got you. So we're more talking about the ones that we just don't know about?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's still happening.
And I understand that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
for me particular, time's of the essence and all that stuff. And we were talking earlier about, and you brought up my case that we were on the other day with the malnutrition child. And we had the night shift DCFS, and it ran smooth as ice, like it was good.
But that goes back to relationships. And I would venture to say that even if we change the law, there's nothing that precludes you guys from doing that. But the fact of the matter is, it's not happening in every parish. You guys are let me tell you, if the other 63 parishes work like this, we'd be in good shape. We'd be in great shape. Yeah. Ms. Wascom?
I just have a question, because I do think, Mr. Sanji, I think that y'all have a more streamlined process than some of the other parishes. And I just want to say this. I got a phone call, I guess it's been about a month ago, from an acquaintance who called for clarification. She's not a mandatory reporter, but she made a report to DCFS and on a child that she believed was being abused in the home. She was aware that school also made the mandatory, like the teacher and the counselor. But she had asked, she put all of her information, please contact me, I have additional information. Like, that was relevant, right? It was a full 24 hours. By the time that she heard from law enforcement had not communicated with DCFS. So, like, when she had called me, she was like, do I need to make an additional report? I was like, I would go ahead and do it because, just in case, like, it's not going to hurt. And, but they still, 24 and 48 hours out, had not communicated. And so I think that, like, just, I'm not in either agency, right? I'm not in any of these parishes. But I get probably one phone call a month of somebody that's saying, like, and it's in other parishes where the relationships are not as good as what you have. And so she was incredibly frustrated because she was like, I am not the mandatory reporter. I'm asking the questions to the mandatory reporter. There was the breakdown of, so many hours between, and then there was no communication. And so they were going into the weekend, and she was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, and so I think that is why it would be beneficial. And, I just, as an outsider that's not in the agencies that gets the phone calls just because I'm on the task force, I think it would be very, very helpful just to cut down on some of the lack of communication where things fall through the cracks.
Thank you. And I 100% agree. I believe we need to figure out a way of doing that, and it's happening already in other states. So I think that's a clear path. There is a standard already in place, and there is something that we actually can look and glean from. And there may be parts that we have to modify. There may be things that we need to add or take away, but I believe that we need to have a centralized location because we still have a gap. From what the report that I saw from Baton Rouge, we still have a gap. And it's not because people are not reporting, it's just the way the process is, and we don't know who's following up.
Or even just a pilot, like, say for a year, it might come to the point where everybody's trained enough that you don't need that person embedded. Or look to your department, like, okay, we have this developed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how can it be replicated?
Okay. I think, that's an option, but at the end of the day, when I learned that allegedly we may have had 4 children already to die by January 16th, there was like literally a child every 4 to 5 days. I was extremely alarmed by that. So for me, this to me is of the utmost importance. We've been working on this, and certainly we've made some great efforts and some great strides, but I really want to make sure that every recognized crack that we have is closed, and this one is still open. And so I'm open to a pilot program, but I would love to see some full implementation of this, and we may have to take a baby step to address it. But I do want to look at what other states are doing because it's being done in other states. I'm sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Ms. Honorable Russell.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Every night after midnight, I get from law enforcement a breakdown and of everyone who was arrested and what they were arrested for. As information sharing. At that point, it's my obligation. If I want to follow up on one, I can. So the having a regional law enforcement officer, I think, is great. Relying on a worker to call and ask questions, I think, is just going to leave us right where we are, where we don't have follow-up, because they have to then initiate. There needs to be a way that all of the calls that come in or broken down, and if there's a referral, great, but that is sent to that regional officer to be able to go through the list and see if there was a referral, if they're not, and then it's their responsibility to then make that call to law enforcement if it hasn't already been done. There needs to be a check and balance, and there needs to be a forced relationship. We can't expect them to develop it. We can't expect any of that. But I think there needs to be a check and balances. So I don't think they need to be incorporated within DCFS. I think DCFS has a system where it filters to that regional officer a breakdown of the 911 calls. It says if there was a referral, the officer can go through, can catch the ones that were not referred, and then reach out and make the referrals where it needs to go. And that way, daily, there is someone who is looking on the law enforcement side to make sure that call was sent. It doesn't stop anyone from making the call to you, because we still want that. But at the end of every day, there's someone on the law enforcement side going through that list and making sure all the referrals were made. I just don't think we need to rely on DCFS to reach out and say, hey, I have a question, because that's not going to be done. I mean, they won't know what question to even ask of you. So this way, there is no question asked. You'll look at it and determine whether or not it was done, and if not, you'll make that action and make that call.
So you believe that we still should have dual reporting?
No, I don't think we need to have, I think one call is all we need.
Okay.
But if someone's making, we're still not telling people you don't have to make that call, because there's certain areas where it's working. I don't think we shut it down and start teaching that you only need to call one place. I think it's the people who have no idea, and they call our office sometimes and say, I don't know who to call. I think when people call DCFS, they assume that law enforcement is going to get notified. We don't want to stop the people, though, who are calling law enforcement, because if there's a rape and they immediately call law enforcement, great. But if the first place they call is DCFS, we need a check and balance to know they're still going to make that report to law enforcement. So I don't think we need to overcomplicate it. I think it's really just a check and balance. Law enforcement's going to get that list every day of what calls came in, make sure the referrals went through. If it did not, make sure that we go ahead and make the referral, and the responsibility then shifts to you to make the referral.
I think, well, a bigger concern for us is what we're just talking about. This is a life-threatening issue, and we're the first ones called. How much time goes in between law enforcement getting there? We don't have enforcement authority.
I guess I'm confused. You're still sending over referrals, right? So you do law enforcement referrals all the time. You don't accept the case that you figured out and the caller didn't, that it wasn't a caretaker that falls within the law. So DCFS has made that determination. We're not taking it, and we're referring it to law enforcement. And that caller might not have called law enforcement. So that referral is still being dependent on DCFS sending it over. And I think what Honorable Russell was saying, it makes sense to have someone from law enforcement looking at it, and if they need to follow up, they can. But if all the calls are coming, a lot are coming to you guys anyways. People don't know. They don't know their reporting requirements. It is confusing as to, is it an uncle? Do you live in the home? Do you help the kids with breakfast? Are you a caretaker or not? You ask all the questions, and DCFS makes that determination, but the person doesn't know. And sometimes they'll say you should call law enforcement too, and sometimes they don't. So that gets dropped. That you sent it over, but they never called law enforcement. I do hope a teacher who's very concerned, they don't want that kid going home, and they're worried that DCFS isn't going to show up in time, they can still call law enforcement and say, we need someone here now. This is a crime. But they know that they need to report abuse or neglect to one number, and it's going to be filtered through. So it's not
But
so
Brett,
confusing.
To Brett, to your point, you're saying that those in DCFS who are answering the hotline have to, if this recommendation were enacted, have both collect the information they need on your side, the social worker side, and collect the information they need that law enforcement would want on their side also, in order to pass that on to law enforcement. And that's difficult. That may not be the best thing.
Because that's too much information for them to have to give? Why?
Because you're asking someone who's not law enforcement to know what law enforcement needs.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
For that 911 call, if I say 911 call, that call back to law enforcement, in order for law enforcement to go and respond right then and there. And I think that was also Captain Sanji's point too.
So do we feel like that's an issue now? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, that's a potential issue that we need to figure out if we're gonna make it. And I don't know if it's like if we're keeping either way, like, people need to be encouraged to still call law enforcement. It's a big risk to say we got it from here and.
No, I agree that we shouldn't be telling people that,
Yeah.
allowing them to, or encouraging them to call. I just don't know how how many people follow through. I just don't,
I
you
think
know,
that's the concern.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think if we look at other states, see what they're doing.
Where
and
where
vet
the
this
state
out.
does this?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Because you brought that up. Is there, you said there's another state that you looked at that,
That has the centralized intake. Look at Arkansas.
to where they're just doing all the intake? There's no dual reporting?
Yes. They do the intake and then it gets assigned to police or DCFS for investigation.
And this wouldn't eliminate their ability to call law enforcement.
No, I'm
It
worried
would
about the
just say that if you
timeliness.
made this one call as your mandatory reporter, you've met your obligation. Like when you're training the nurses, when you're training the mental health professionals, when you're training the teachers, it would say, you need to call this number if you're concerned about a child. And this is the number, this meets your mandatory reporting requirements. If you're gonna call from a hospital, they're already in the hospital, right? So they're gonna call law enforcement if they need to. If someone is truly, if it's a 911 call, you have Quick Connect, right? So you can connect to 911 if you need to. But are you getting 911 calls to the department a lot? Like your intakes that are coming in, are you getting 911-like calls often from a teacher, from a mental health professional? Or are they often a later reporting that needs to be properly vetted to whatever agency?
I think my concern would be with those 911 calls, however few there are, because, again, I'm looking at the timeliness of a situation. If it's a life-threatening injury, and we're taking that report in, and let's say that's not clear, that it's that immediate and that much in danger, there's a delay in law enforcement getting that to get out there.
I guess that would be assuming mandatory reporters are gonna not call 911 in an emergency when they're reporting abuse and neglect. I just don't, I don't think that's.
I think it's safer just to have both, to where.
But that's not, is your staff telling them to hang up and call 911?
No.
So what's, I mean, yeah, sometimes they do, but sometimes so what's happening? They don't know they have to, so it's still
Well,
coming there.
You're talking hopefully they're not calling us if it's a 911 call.
Right. Yeah, that shouldn't happen
But then,
at all.
let's say during the intake of that it rises to that level, and let's say I think it's more immediate if it can be done both ways. I'm thinking about the timeliness, and let's say, 10 minutes could mean life or death, correct?
Yes, but that would be assuming that a mandatory reporter is going to call the hotline when a child's dying in front of them instead of 911. Like they're going to say, oh, my mandatory reporting requirements are to call DCFS about this kid, not I need emergency medical attention to this child. I think you're still going to do that. You're going to call 911 if a child needs immediate response.
But you want to direct all that through one?
There's two different things.
No, I understand.
There's an emergency response
But
and then there's a
we want us-
report of abuse and neglect.
My concern is if it's life-threatening, the timeliness of the issue, okay? And if there is a delay in that getting to law enforcement, then why would we do that, put a layer in when it can go both ways, when people can,
But the dual
I think she's
reporting
saying
is
that
a
it's
layer.
life-threatening, they're not calling you.
You're not
they're
calling
us directly.
but it could rise to that level on the call to realize that these children are more in danger than we realize.
Then you
But
can
Captain,
still
you
direct
get
that
phone
to
calls.
We can direct it.
Your agency gets phone calls even in the non-life-threatening situation, right? I'm guessing teachers are calling you guys first, possibly.
At pretty much the same time, they try to do it at the same time.
Yeah, so
You
in
know?
that scenario, if they do call you first, law enforcement's not gonna tell them to hang up and call DCFS at that point, right?
They automatically know that they gotta contact DCFS, so they do the DCFS, referral or to call the hotline and everything. But my school system, we're very tight with our school system. So I'm not more or less stressing that. I just don't wanna tell people, I guess, it's a verbiage thing, I guess, from there. I don't wanna tell everybody, hey, only call the hotline, only call the hotline. And then eventually, in 10 years, they're only gonna be calling the hotline, you know what I'm saying? So we still gotta leave it open for them to call us. The emergency side of it, I think if something's life-threatening, they're not calling the hotline at all, they're calling us directly.
So would it work if your mandatory requirement is call this number? If you feel like you need to make a law enforcement referral, you can do that as well on your own. If it's an emergency, obviously you're gonna call 911.
Yeah, I mean, at
So
some
I
point in
think-
time, just, I mean,
think it's
there's
like
gotta be
common
some
sense.
common sense in here. you know,
Yeah.
too.
I think
But I think the
if you have
best
a
thing to
school
do,
resource officer and you're like, I called DCFS, I don't know if
So-
they're coming, but I'm afraid this child's gonna go home.
yeah, I got 32
Yeah.
schools, 48 buildings in the whole parish, and I got 6 full-time SSOs in my high schools only. And then I got rovers that work overtime details for the rest of it. So they're not there all the time. You know what I'm saying, at those schools.
Yeah,
They-
I understand.
We hit every school at least 2 or 3 times a day, but they're not there all the time at the rest of the schools, you know, and all that stuff. But I can see, for me, I can go to my schools and I can go talk at like I did last night, I can go talk at a school board meeting and express to them, this is what's gonna happen, but I still want you to call me and it's over, we're good. You know what I'm saying, for my parish. You know, but, yeah, I just think that if it's an emergency, I don't think they're calling DCFS at all. If it's life-threatening emergency.
I mean, you can pull data if you're getting those calls and let us know if
Wouldn't,
we're gonna
wouldn't the best thing to do is do what is find out who's doing this,
look at it.
look at it, and then make a decision from there?
And there's not a 45-minute wait time, you know, with all due respect anymore. That's been eliminated, you know, since November.
That's great.
I think we'll agree to look into this further. It's a suggestion. I think
Look
we've heard
into
a lot of, I can't tell if somebody else wants
I think
to speak. Okay.
I think not, like, a large part, I think of this, at least from a law enforcement perspective on this dual reporting issue is also what can the contact information or of who made the report, that goes into this. And if that recommendation isn't changed or we don't have access to it, that makes a difference as to whether then,
We agree with that change.
yeah, okay.
We absolutely do.
Okay.
And I think that's we'll transition to that next section that we've been kind of talking about.
Okay,
Ms.
yeah,
Strapp, if
so
you wanna-
we'll go to mandatory reporters. So what we've been talking about here is the issue about the confidentiality and DCFS being able to disclose the mandatory reporters' identification or additional information that they have to law enforcement. There's been discussion about law enforcement not receiving enough information to be able to do an investigation or do anything with the information that they've received. And then I think also one thing that's come up, it's not on here, but is the confidentiality for if we're expanding the sharing of confidential information, just making sure that the entity that receives that information is also keeping it confidential, that we're not opening it up too much. So if law enforcement shares information with the DCFS employee, that they are keeping that confidential, not sharing information with the family and vice versa. And then do we want to do the full mandatory reporter section?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah.
And then another component is the mandatory reporter training for all medical professionals or all mandatory reporters. And the question from a drafting perspective would be if we're requiring mandatory reporter training, if we are moving forward with not requiring dual reporting, are we requiring mandatory reporter training on recognizing abuse and when to report? Because I believe right now, a component of the training is the dual reporting and when to report to law enforcement and when to report to DCFS. So I think that would work in connection with whatever direction we're moving in with the DCFS processes. And then the last one is one that Ms. Wascom had brought up, is the adding supervised visit monitors to the list of mandatory reporters.
Does anybody have comment about the mandatory reporters?
No, we don't have any problems with
I don't see.
that. And
Okay.
we offer online reporter training now.
Yeah.
You know, so if we need medical personnel to start doing that, they can do that already with us. Teachers are.
And I think depending on how step one goes, the reporting requirements might be different. So that would also change step two.
Right, so would we, if the first section happened with the requiring the reporting to DCFS, we would still want to require all the medical professionals to take mandatory report training? Okay.
Yeah, I think so, they know. Do you agree, Dr. Hook? Yes, I think so.
And the recommendation would be to expand it to all mandatory reporters. I know we've talked really about medical professionals because we had testified, but all mandatory reporters? Okay. And would that be the annual, because that's what we do for the teachers, is annual training?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you agree, Dr. Hook? You're the medical.
I think one thing we may want to consider is just making sure that CEUs would be, like continuing education could be offered, like it's going to be a requirement, but then also if we can get the boards to recognize that for continuing education, that would definitely be something that would be a benefit to the provider as well, or the reporter.
That would be a part of their
Yeah.
continuing education, not in addition to.
That was going to be my comment too, is just looking at what mechanisms we want to access to make sure. So is it the licensing boards? Is it like credentialing bodies for organizations? Like for our organization, it's part of our onboarding. And so that's in everyone's personnel file. But that's not standard practice. And so how do we, like, what are the mechanisms that we have access to that we can require that happens with more predictability?
I think that would be, we'd ask the medical professionals. I don't have.
Yeah, I think,
mean,
from
I
a-
think-
yeah, state perspective, probably
Yeah.
the licensing, since they have to
Boards and
do
all
the
that,
annual renewal would probably be
That's typically,
that's
how we rolled out
most
opioid
straightforward
training through our licensing.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment too, that there is a compact license in our state, so somebody may hold a license that allows them to practice in many other states. So if they already have that training, would that be something they could apply to being a compact license holder to practice in Louisiana?
That'd be something to consider.
Yeah.
Well, but the training that they received in Texas would be different potentially
yeah.
than
Fair point.
the laws that in Louisiana. So
So that
Would
would
have
be
to-
something you would have to probably address through the Board of Nursing.
Okay.
That may not be the only profession.
That it has to be Louisiana training.
And it would be the
If you practice, yeah.
DCFS for training, because right now we have provisions that allow for the comparable training, but this would be to require the DCFS approved training for everyone.
I think that's the way to keep it the cleanest, especially if we, like Act 409, we went and we revised our training so that everybody that took that training would understand what was implemented by that. And so if there are changes that occur, that's the only way for us to make sure that it's updated.
Good point.
And given that our licenses get renewed every 2 years, would that annually or every 2 years, or when your license would be renewed, or?
We're doing it annually for DOE.
Annually for the.
Well, we're doing annually for DOE. I think it should be an annual thing. It's not that grueling of a training session. It's something to be beneficial. And, no reason not to sharpen the saw.
And maybe there could be, if we could develop like a pre-test. I know we had talked about like pre-testing. If you get 100% on your pre-test, do you really need to, could that be like the training was met, that training need was met for the year? You have to take the initial training and then do the pre-test, perhaps. We could talk about it a little bit, but that might be a way to make it so you don't have to do it every single year.
Okay. So requires DCFS mandatory reporters training for medical professions and all mandatory reporters. That's where we are. Okay. All right. Sound like we had some recommendations there. Okay. Add supervised visit monitors to list of mandatory reporters. Okay.
Question.
Ms.
just
Wascom?
For clarification, the disclosure of the identification of the mandatory reporter, is there going to be a way for it still to be anonymous if they choose?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, that's all. I just wanted to make sure that was not removed, the ability to stay anonymous. Okay.
Okay. So I see the head shaking of yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Yes. I think that's important. Mhm. Any comments regarding adding the supervised visits monitors to the list of mandatory reporters? Any questions on that? Comments? Okay. All right. We're going to move on to the CACs and MDTs. And Amanda, if you would, start with that and go through it.
Yes, ma'am. All right, so the first recommendation we had was to require a DCFS employee to be assigned to work at each CAC. And then additional recommendations, I think we've all discussed, is the standardized statewide protocols for CACs and MDTs. That could include requiring alerts to all MDT members when a new case is opened, standardizing the referrals accepted by a CAC. We've heard some differences about who accepts from DCFS and law enforcement, and the time frame in which the agencies are getting the child in for a CAC interview, and then requiring cases to be presented to the MDT prior to DCFS or law enforcement closing. And we had an amendment recommended to that suggestion to say if there's been a CAC interview done on the case.
Okay. Any questions, comments regarding this section? Okay, Ms. Hadley?
I guess my question is, what is the idea of DCFS? Like, what would they be doing in the CAC?
This actually came from the CACs, that the thought was they had talked about doing the MDT enhancement to get an MDT facilitator in each region, and then, but an alternate proposal was also if there was a DCFS employee that could act as that liaison, similar to kind of the law enforcement, to be that bridge between DCFS and the CAC, and then that person would be responsible for handling all the, sitting in on the MDT and being responsible for communicating that, instead of DCFS sending in different individuals to the same MDT meeting, that that one person would take ownership and responsibility.
And that one person investigates those cases, or are they just being a representative to try to gather as much detail from other personnel's investigations?
I don't think they would be the investigator, but we'd need to work more with the LACAC and see, kind of flesh that out a little bit. But that was just a recommendation that they.
I mean, I'm treading lightly because I wasn't involved in those communications. But, I mean, in a dream world, we would love to have law enforcement and DCFS under one roof. But having 14 to 15 CACs and 64 parishes, it's challenging to have those kind of dynamics. And then with DCFS being involved, I feel like it would be more powerful and clear communication if the investigators were a part of those MDT meetings, because they interact with the children, interact with the families, have those interviews with them in the field, to then just have a representative just give basic feedback on their investigations. I feel like there's just more impact when it's the actual investigator present for those meetings. And I think we need just to have a lot more solid mandates for them to be at those meetings. And I know it can be tricky because DCFS does so much out in the field. They get cases where they have to go to multiple different families in a day. But I feel like having just the investigator present and not just a representative, because right now there are a few MDT meetings where there is just a representative, but they have very little to no information to give us other than if it's substantiated or unsubstantiated. Having the investigator there, they can give us details of child development and what they observed seeing that kid in the home, things like that, to be able to add more information to those meetings is just kind of my thought process. But again, I want to tread lightly.
Hold on, Dr. St. Germain. Let me do this. Dr. Hook was first, and then Dr. St. Germain.
So
And
I
we're
just
all on.
wanted to say that ideally the investigator would be there, and that should be strongly encouraged. But in some of the regions of the state, we might only have, a small portion of investigators for that whole region. And so if they're out on a life-threatening injury, if they're out on a fatality, if they're in court, then they're not going to be able to participate. So I would not want to make that mandated, but maybe making sure that we just have adequate representation and strongly encourage that when they are able to participate, at that local office, that they are being told that this is very important. And the MDT is something that we all, should try to be at when appropriate. But definitely having somebody there that knows the case well, I think, is crucial.
Agreed, yep, for sure.
So along those lines, Dr. Hook, what would you recommend in terms, if we don't legislate that, how do we kind of ensure that it happens?
Well, I do think there has to be someone from our agency that works closely with the CAC, such as a liaison or something, to be able to really coordinate those efforts. And I think that would improve it if we did have that central contact for the CAC in those regions, to have that coordination, and then to work with the case worker, supervisor, manager in those cases to make sure they're available when they can be.
Yeah.
Or that they have the most up-to-date information for those MDTs.
It sounds like our care coordinators that we have currently, they do a lot of care coordination solely for human trafficking. And with our care coordinator on staff that we have in our CAC, she does really well to try to be a bridge between DCFS and our CAC. I mean, we already have what you're saying. It just sounds very similar to that model that we already have. And I've seen it do really well in communication with state police, to local law enforcement agencies, to DCFS. So we have something that can work, and I've seen it work. Now, as far as who are they employed under can make a difference. But if even in the CAC world, we could also be that gap, having someone specific to coordinate, just like we do with human trafficking.
Yeah.
But technically in our CAC world, we should have that, because we have MDT coordinators. That is a position that is in our CAC. And our MDT coordinators, they're the ones that coordinate the meetings. They're also the ones that try to coordinate communication between law enforcement and DCFS. But as well as our staff as forensic interviewers, we try to uphold to that as well. If I know there's a case that was brought to us and law enforcement isn't familiar or aware that DCFS is involved yet, I will coordinate with DCFS locally to see, hey, do you have this case? And if they do, I'm like, well, we just did an interview. Let me give you a rundown on what happened. So we try to bridge those gaps where we can. And I feel like maybe that can be more of a requirement on CACs. Even if that investigator cannot make it to that MDT meeting, what if we as a CAC flag that case to then set up another time later that day or later that week to coordinate between that investigator, DA's office, and DCFS worker? I just feel like we have these agencies, law enforcement, DCFS, CACs, we're individual, and trying to bleed employees into other agencies, what would that do if we're not already communicating individually to each other? What is that going to do, bringing in some other representative to be housed? Yeah,
and I don't know that I would even advocate for co-house. I mean, ideally, if that would, in the perfect world, we would all be co-housed all together
amazing.
and just doing these joint
Yeah.
investigations. But I think just having good contacts for you all to always have a consistent place for you to go when you're having difficulty. And I don't know that we have that everywhere now across the
Right.
state.
And I know we briefly talked earlier today, just coordinating with each agency having a specialized unit. What if DCFS has a specialized sexual abuse unit or physical abuse unit? And just like law enforcement has those departments, what if there's someone specialized where there's not multiple people that we're having to contact, but we know one set department that we need to contact for those specific cases to get on board with?
Thank you. Dr. St. Germain.
I was just going to for the support, what you were saying. It's so critical to have that investigator there. If not, we lose weeks of time trying to coordinate everything. And that'd be great if they could come another time, but to get 16 people together another time during a day is almost impossible. But if the investigator can't be there, what we've had is the supervisor bringing their field notes in, or even with law enforcement, they fill out a field note for the MDT if they can't physically be there. So that's absolutely moves that MDT forward. Whereas if we don't have a piece or a piece is missing, it gets restaffed to another MDT that may be a month away.
Okay. Dr. Birch.
I was just going to similarly say there are value, right? Like sometimes we may not know, oh, DCFS has had multiple investigations and law enforcement comes in with a case, and having someone who has access to the system, the history, and who can look those things up. I mean, it's sort of why the national CAC model sells that co-location. And so like in jurisdictions where it works, that's amazing. But in jurisdictions where it's not working, like trying to figure out how to gap fill is not the, like, I think the goal of this task force is to find that consistency and that solution that like makes it work where it's not working. And so in those like communities where you've got these great collaborative MDTs, amazing. But if you can't get someone on the phone, or you don't have someone who shows up for the interview and you're like, oh shoot, there's like a totally unrelated but separate DCFS investigation at the same time that this kid is here for criminal investigation, you lose the benefit of the joint investigation happening concurrently, which is what co-location is sort of intended to do. But in like large, right, like multi-jurisdiction CACs, it's a tougher thing to figure out. So like, I just want to name that there are benefits to it, and there are things that it brings value to that kind of joint investigation and collaborative model.
I couldn't have said that better. I think that you really, really communicated that very well. It sounds like, though, there may be a template that we can utilize that I'm assuming that's not really being utilized today.
We have care coordinators currently that are with CACs and work closely with DCFS.
I heard you mention, though, human trafficking. Is it solely for
It's solely for human trafficking.
so that's what I'm talking about. So that's solely for human trafficking. It's not for child abuse. Yeah. And so it may be something that we need to take a further look at, right?
For sure.
Yeah, okay. Any additional questions? Comments? Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Amanda, you on.
Just for clarifications and moving forward, because I think that the LACAC has presented, this was before the Health and Welfare Committee, that not every CAC has an MDT, or every region has an MDT facilitator.
I don't know
Okay.
for sure which one would or would not.
Okay, because I think that was part of the thought, was that DCFS person could help serve
But where
there's not a CAC facilitator.
Okay.
But okay, thank you.
And we need to take a look at that.
Okay.
Because I'm not sure where that would be either. Okay, so we are leaving the CAC's MDT area and moving now to schools and school employees, which is another big topic and hot topic issue, especially around school employees. Ms. Amanda?
All right. So the first one is that Senator Bear will be doing a little bit of cleanup on Act 409 relative to the Early Learning Center licensing. And then the next issue, these kind of go together, is the school employees that are accused of child abuse that are moving between schools, has come up several times. There have been some recommendations maybe about requiring statewide reporting and tracking of allegations that are made against a school employee for physical or sexual abuse against a student, or maybe just prohibiting schools from allowing employees to resign in lieu of termination if there's an allegation of physical or sexual abuse.
Yes. And so since we started this task force, that has been a hot button issue. It's come up multiple times. And it's something that, to me, I feel like we absolutely do not have a good handle around. And what I have learned, seemingly, in lieu of individuals being fired, they have just been allowed to quit. And what they do is go and store somewhere else. And one of the most egregious situations I heard was an individual who was working as a what do you call that? It was a part-time like police officer or something like that. Security, where it looks like he has authority, then working inside the school, then leaving that school, and then seemingly going to another school, who was allegedly abusing children who were disabled. That absolutely have to be addressed. Any questions or comments? Okay. So we will be coming forth with some recommendations as it relates to what that needs to look like. I absolutely am against individuals just being able to quit without there being something in the records to indicate why they left. Yeah. Okay. Continue, Amanda.
All right, for judiciary, as you'll see on the next page, a lot of the judiciary recommendations are for continued study, but one proposal that we could move forward with this session is prohibiting the courts from imposing contempt sanctions against parents or reporters for reporting suspected child abuse and neglect if the report's made in good faith.
Any questions? No questions at this time.
Okay, do you want to move to, and then
You go on to the next one, yes.
the final is the confidentiality and identifying information of minors. This is relative to concern about testimony that's releasing private information about a child that may have experienced abuse. So one suggestion was to allow, so there's in current law, there's a list of reasons you can go into executive session, but there was nothing for this task force to allow us to go into executive session, so we could add something around the lines of testimony related to child victims to allow us to go into executive session. There also, maybe in Title 46, there's provisions relative to officials speaking about or disclosing confidential information about minors that were abused, but maybe adding in there some coverage about details of the abuse, because it's just name, address, and things, but not the actual abuse that occurred.
Okay, and I think this is something that we talked about. And I want to go back to the judiciary, if y'all don't mind, for just a minute. Many of y'all may remember some of the individuals who have come before us and stated how they actually were held in contempt or had fines placed on them because they went before the courts, right? Yeah. And so I think this is something we actually need to address, and so we plan on doing that as well. I just want to circle back to that, to bring that out, as well as information regarding the child victim. And the executive session piece, I think, is extremely important. And then information about the abuse of a minor, keeping those details as close to confidentiality is extremely important. No questions or comments, I think. Okay. Seem like we rocking and rolling. And if y'all have any ideas in terms of, because we're going to start drafting the language for this, and we will send it back so that everybody can take a look at it. But when you see it, it will be in line with these things that are out actually listed here on these 2 pages. All right. So no questions, Amanda. We will continue.
And then the last thing is just areas for continued task force study. I think these are things that have just come up, but we don't really have any recommendations about how to address them. And so it's really with the judiciary. So there's there's been some concern brought up about how supervised visitation and how individuals are appointed to be supervisors for visitations. The difference in evidentiary proceedings in civil and family courts versus juvenile courts. One thought we had there was to ask the State Law Institute to study that issue and provide recommendations, because we've heard some different testimony about what's allowed in one versus the other. And then there was discussion about the potential of appointing CASA advocates for child custody cases that have abuse allegations. I think there's been some conversations, but I don't think anybody's at a point to move forward with that right now. And then how to have some kind of system where we can have impartial behavioral health professionals that could be used in custody cases where there's allegations of physical or sexual abuse. And then with the CACs.
Before you move from judiciary, the judges, when they came, they had made so there was a lot that was stated with them. Are any of those recommendations included here from the judges? Because they were going to go back and do some things as well, I think, or look at some things. I can't remember everything.
Did have conversations with Judge Holdridge, and that's where the Law Institute study came from.
Okay.
As far as that, we haven't gotten
Anything else?
recommendations as far as
Okay.
training or anything like that.
Okay. And I would actually say that, I'm sorry. I need to, Michelle, yeah.
Not sure what she was going to say, but I think we got through all of the judiciary. Do you want to cover the CACs?
Yes. Some things that have come up is non-disclosure due to the interview process. Some CACs doing exploratory interviews, others not. There was some concern about coaching and how maybe we could come up with some education requirements for forensic interviews. There was discussion around document retention, and then the CAC's relationship with the sexual abuse centers.
That last one?
That, with the child advocacy centers, with I think what services are offered and communication between the different groups offering services, that was something that came up in September, I think, or October.
One area
So that
had
must be
something that was
medical
working
too
well.
then, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
medical.
I think it was the doctors who brought that up.
And I think STAR.
STAR,
Yes,
yes.
STAR.
Okay.
I had a question about the coaching and what, I guess, understanding more of what we're wanting to explore for forensic interviewers and children being coached.
Yes, about children being coached. That was the discussion about with law enforcement and the CACs, and about not that the CACs were. Michelle, do you want to?
I'm trying to remember that piece, but I believe it was just if it's uniform education, what's being relayed from CACs to law enforcement to DCFS,
Gotcha,
just to
okay.
look into that, because it was brought up, I think, when law enforcement was testifying, just that language is used a lot, coaching.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the law enforcement side of it. I just know with our forensic interviewers, when it comes to coaching, I guess I think I remember our conversation, just kind of being able to give our expert opinion as far as what we observed to shed light to law enforcement. And again, that's just more of just shedding light to certain verbal or nonverbal cues in the interviews. Not in saying that is or isn't coaching, because that's where we also, as forensic interviews, need to be careful, because we can't make that determination because we are the neutral party. So we can't assume one way or another. But I think refining our skills as forensic interviewers to articulate those verbal or nonverbal cues during those interviews to better serve law enforcement in their investigation. I think that was
Yes, that was
the conversation.
yes,
Okay.
yep.
And I would just add that your forensic medical evaluators are people who are trained on coaching and can give expert opinion on whether language is medicalized or outside of the realm of a certain age child. So they're also a great resource to be able to testify in court about coaching and things like that.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments? Document retention, relationship with sexual abuse centers. Okay. Okay. Okay, well, looks like that concludes our 2 pages of recommendations. And as stated earlier, we will be actually putting together different packets to include a lot of this information in terms of legislative ideas or a legislative packet to actually encompass a lot of this. I know that I am personally doing the cleanup on Act 409. We will be working with some of my colleagues on some of the other bills that will be coming forward, and we're going to have a submission of those that will be sent to everyone probably before February 15th, maybe. That sounds like a reasonable timeline. Okay, so we can get your feedback before submitting those. Session starts earlier. Session starts on March, is it 9th or 10th? It's the 9th. Okay, it's the second Monday at 12 p.m. And so a lot of these packets have a lot of our information have to be submitted. Before we actually go in, I don't remember the submission date. So I know that we have a tight timeline as well to kind of get this information in. So once you receive it, I'm going to ask that you don't delay in reviewing it so that we can get your feedback, so that we can try to, as best possible, glean the best part of what we have discussed in here that we would like to be a part of a legislative instrument. I do have a question that I want to go back to relative to the department, because I have a concern relative to our reporting process as it relates to when there is a death. And so since I have the department here, and we've had 4 deaths, and allegedly they've been all, and I don't know how y'all make those assumptions, how do y'all make that, how do y'all make that case? So in the last one, I think it was easy because the child seemingly had starved to death, which was the child from Ascension Parish, which is where I grew up, right? So when I saw it, I was very alarmed, called my family to see if we knew that family, because I didn't recognize the names right away. But it's my understanding, so what really alarmed me was the time, because the child died on January 1st or 2nd. But the report to us, well, we didn't find out, at least I didn't find out until it was on the news, which was on the 16th. So there's supposed to be a process in place that, and I know I don't represent that area, but how does that, and you looking at me, so I'm looking at you, but I'm really kind of asking the question to the department because I'm not quite sure if I understand. I know there's a window by which the legislator in the area is supposed to be notified. When I call text the representatives in that area, and senators, they were aware, but they were only aware because of the news.
On the process that we reported to you all?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the things I want to know, because that was like, first of all, I'd like to know how nobody knew, like the news didn't report it till 14 days afterwards. Like, so there was no reporting prior to the end, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I don't know why it was on 2 weeks later for the news.
Okay. So tell me the reporting process with you guys. as it relates to legislators. And even though I don't live in that area, I'm going to do something because I want to be personally notified when children are dying of neglect and abuse, especially as a pro tem. And so that could be my request.
No, I understand that. And this is a child that we did not have involvement with this family.
Okay.
And so when we found out about it, this was the first that this child had not been seen. And
The child was 5 because
Wade
so that's so
19,
much.
horrific.
There's so much epic failure to me in this area. So that child never saw a doctor. Evidently, he never went to school. I mean, I think, right? Never went to school, right?
Correct.
I mean, is that what happened?
Correct. Yes.
How is that? So I guess and I serve on the child death review, and I'm going to bring this case up because I need to understand how this is, to me, is just complete epic failure. How this child was never seen. The child was born. There should have been some contact with somebody at some point, medical field, definitely. Somebody should have seen the child. Then to me, family knew that the child exists.
Just let you know too, this is still an active, ongoing case.
Yeah,
as well.
be careful here.
Okay. All right. I will stop.
I'm just-
I will stop. Yeah, I'm just kind
We can
of.
talk.
But so okay, let's go through the process. The child never had any encounter with you guys. But what normally happens?
Well, if we receive a report, of course, we're going to go, depending on what level, we're going to go and investigate.
But when the child dies, how do we get notified? Go back to that part for
That
me.
normally, that will come through us. but
Okay, how
is
does that
after
work?
that we've done an intake report, and then we'll
Okay.
get that back to you. And we have a certain timeline that we need to get that back to you so you know.
Okay. So what's the timeline to get back to us? I thought it was 24, 48 hours.
For the ombudsman, is 24 hours that we notify her of any death.
24 hours. Did y'all notify her or us?
We'll notify her, then you all will be notified from there.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that's why Senator Jackson Andrews brought the cleanup bill to make sure that we are notified.
Well, Title 24, Section 525, passed in 2023, requires the state child ombudsman to notify legislators within 24 hours of being notified of a death due to abuse or neglect.
Okay.
Now, the child could die, like this child died on January 1st. The department has yet to send a notice that the child died due to abuse or neglect because the investigation hasn't been completed.
Okay.
Then in 2024, Senator Jackson Andrews was upset because the report that the Ombuds Office sent to the legislator to her for a death in her district, the death had actually occurred, I think, about 10 months earlier. The problem was that the autopsy, the department doesn't complete their investigation until there is a determination by a coroner. And because of this particular coroner not sending the report timely, I was notified, the first time I knew about the death of this child, I think in Monroe, was 10 months after the child's death when the department told me about it, and I sent it on to Senator Jackson Andrews. She was upset because it had occurred so much earlier. So in 2024, the legislature amended Title 24, Section 525 to include a section that once accepted for investigation, a child fatality has to be notified to the Child Ombudsman's Office within 72 hours. This death on January 1st, we were notified about the investigation. The investigation hasn't completed. The law currently requires that the Ombuds Office notifies the legislators within 24 hours of being notified that the child died due to abuse or neglect, not that there is an investigation of a fatality. So those are the two types of notification. One is there's been a fatality and we're investigating. The legislature, the law does not require that the legislators be notified of that. The second is once that investigation is completed and there is a determination that the fatality was caused by abuse or neglect, the department notifies me, and I have 24 hours to notify the appropriate legislator, and I do.
Okay, and so because this is still yet an ongoing investigation, I want to be careful how I ask this, but we do know that arrests were made. And I guess, so,
Law enforcement. Law enforcement's
So it
not
has nothing to
required
do- yes.
Yeah, but law enforcement's not required to notify the ombuds office, so I don't have any notification to send in that regard.
so I have a issue with the notification process to us, right? Because sounds like then they technically may not give you a report for, it could be months. Yeah. And then you have 24 hours to give it to us, but then we did not know in a timely fashion. And I think that needs to be streamlined a little bit better. And I'm not quite sure exactly what that needs to look like, but I don't want to wait. I don't want to find out 6 months down the line that this is what happened. That's me.
Well, and
Okay, Representative Emerson.
My question is just, I don't know who would do it, but why can't we as legislators be notified there was a death of a 5-year-old, period? I mean, is that something that we would want to do? I mean, I would say that's in my parish.
Yes.
I didn't even know anything about that.
Until just now?
Uh-huh. So, I mean, if there would be any way that we could know, just so that we could reach out to the family, is what I'm thinking. And I recognize that it would take, months for an investigation, I guess, but, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Dr. Hook, you're on.
So I would just want to clarify that we do not receive all reports of child deaths.
Right.
We receive the report if it's suspected to be because of abuse or neglect. So there would have to be some coordination, like if a child were to pass away at a hospital and they did not suspect abuse or neglect, that would not be reported to us. And if you all did want to be notified, we would have to figure out a mechanism.
How to do that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, I got you. So that wouldn't be something that y'all would just automatically have, like we're assuming that you
Right.
would.
Well, and, I mean, there have been some children who perished in fires that have not, even if it was reported to DCFS, it may not rise to the level of a DCFS investigation,
Right.
but it's still in the media. So,
I didn't see it in the media.
Yes.
And I mean, we do get several calls about suspicious deaths that end up after, the full investigation is completed to be things like sudden infant death syndrome. Sometimes it is not a cause of abuse or neglect. And so just want to clarify that too, that there are often times that we get a report of a death or a fatality and it does not ultimately, it was not the result of abuse or neglect.
right. And a good example is a drowning incident that was reported, and after investigation, it was not due to lack of supervision. It was,
Okay.
and DCFS determined that it was not, the fatality was not the result of abuse or neglect. And my problem is now that they have to notify me that they're doing an investigation, when they close it as not abuse or neglect, they need to let me know. But the legislators have not been notified of the investigation, just if it results
Right.
in the death being caused by abuse or neglect. So that's the disconnect. I was notified that this particular incident was investigated, but I've not been notified that the death, that DCFS determined that the fatality was the result of abuse or neglect. Now, law enforcement has clearly enough evidence to move forward with an arrest. DCFS has not completed their investigation.
Okay. Michelle.
Okay. Since I'm her boss,
Yeah,
she
this is
can't
weird.
ask me any questions.
I think we can look into that reporting issue.
Too, from a coroner's perspective, the hardest cases to prove or disprove are children who die of failure to thrive because it could be something genetic, and they may be running studies that are at big medical centers across the nation. So that may have been a delay, or could be a delay in getting a death certificate, or actually them saying that. So it is probably the hardest cases. And of course, the coroner's office or medical examiner's office wants to get that 100% correct. So that may, caused that 10-month delay. I've seen that happen. And also with toxicology. And if we're talking a parish that doesn't have a coroner who has connections to get a pediatric patient seen, that may even delay them even getting their medical exam. So there's a lot of factors in that I just wanted to bring up.
And in that
That could
particular
delay.
case, I think the autopsy was actually performed by an out-of-state coroner, medical examiner, and then obviously it wasn't his priority to sign the report once it was completed, so it just took, there were those kinds of delays as well.
And I would point out too, that we don't always have the identifying information of the child. We only have that information if that was disclosed publicly. So they will tell us an age range and that a child died and it was a result of abuse or neglect, but what we might be forwarding to you is just that occurred.
Right.
Not who it was. If
Okay.
it wasn't identified.
And the department prepares what they call summary disposition, which gives the date of death, the parish of death, the circumstances surrounding the death, and the age of the child. And I simply forward, I'm just a conduit of information.
Right.
I forward that to the appropriate legislator. It's generally the same day. Sometimes when I'm seeking some clarification because I have a question about the report, I'll delay sending that just to see if I can clarify some of the. I got one recently that it said cause of death unknown. If it's abuse or neglect, I would think there would be a cause of death. And so I delayed in sending that out to see if I could receive some clarification on that summary
Right.
disposition. But when I got the summary disposition at 4:46 on a Friday afternoon, and so I didn't get a lot of response that Friday night. But we are working with the department to try to clarify this process and streamline the process. We just have there's some bumps in the road that we're working on.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I do understand why legislators would want to know that a child
Yeah.
has died due to abuse or neglect in their district. I can understand why you might want to know if there's been a child death at all, but I don't know that the state really should be that involved with grieving families. If a child dies due to a terminal illness, do you really want the child ombudsman letting you know about that?
Yeah, yeah.
But if it's abuse or neglect, that is a responsibility that the legislators, I think, take very seriously and would want to know that, yes, somehow this child's situation was not addressed in a way that benefited, and the failure to address this child's situation may have been a cause of the death is something that the legislators do want to know.
We've concluded that issue. I don't see anybody else green on the board. I do think we want to, Dr. Hook, you wanted to provide some updates as to the alternative resolution discussion we had at the last task force.
Yes.
meeting.
So there were some questions about alternative response, and I don't remember the specific questions that we had at the last, but we do have some updated numbers for y'all. And so it does look like, based on the most recent report, we've had a total record count of 412 alternative response cases accepted, and 169 of those were children were involved in the school setting. The remainder of those were in a home where there was no parental culpability.
I believe the two questions I remember I had were what services are being provided to these families when alternative response is involved, and then how many of these cases did turn into investigations.
Yes, and so I did go through a portion of the cases. Just I had to do it manually because there's no way for us to be able to alternatively identify them. I got through 50, and of the 50, none of those had turned into investigations. Some of the cases that were reviewed, it looked like even the allegation may have been borderline for what we should have accepted as an alternative response. But there also were some very significant, serious issues that we needed to respond to, for sure. As far as services, What typically will happen is the agency will refer the family to whatever appropriate services they deem necessary at the time. Often that is therapy or counseling services. And what I will say is that even when we make those referrals, there's still a very significant lag in the availability of a provider to be able to meet their needs. So we are identifying families that might need services, but then we're not really having the services available for them to get timely follow-up. And so that is a concern.
So just to kind of follow up on that, in terms of the timeliness of it, what happens when you recognize that it may not happen within time? Do you just still allow them to stay on that track, or is there anything else that is put into place?
So, as far as the agency, if there is no investigation at that point, the involvement is voluntary from the family for an alternative response, because we're really going in to assess the situation and see if there are additional needs for that family or how we can service them. We don't provide direct services in that way for counseling, and so we do have to refer to the community. And we don't have, even for children in foster care, a lot of our kids are waiting to be seen for things that we know they need treatment for. And so we're able to advocate for them and try to get them bumped to the top of the line because we have custody of those children. But even on the best of circumstances in some of the rural areas in Louisiana, we've got kids on months of wait.
That's disheartening. I do want to go back to this, and I do want to apologize, guys, for having to jump up. I don't know if I necessarily want to require that we are notified of every death of children. Okay, so y'all did clarify that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But I do want to, those that are imminent, and yeah. Okay. And if there is some allegation that we know there was some abuse, that we definitely are notified. And so I guess we could talk a little bit more with you, Madam Ombudsman, in terms of what that could look like, because I'm not quite sure. Like, I just want to be notified. I am modified that my colleague who actually is in that area did not know this until today. And when I saw it on Friday afternoon, when I had a range of emotions from sadness to crying to anger, I just was trying to figure out like what happened. And so I want to make sure that there's some level of awareness to us. We need to know that, especially if it's in our district.
Well, it seems to me that the reason you would need to know it is that people in your community might reach out to you and you don't
Absolutely.
be caught unawares.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think it's important that the policymakers are aware of issues that impact negatively vulnerable families and children.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just the notification of the death, but figuring out what we can do to prevent this from happening to some other family.
Correct.
And so, in my view, the underlying reason for this notification is so that the people who are in positions to fund programs or change law
Right.
or policy know before we're not looking back so far to say this is something we need. Because you know that the lack of services or the lack of oversight or the lack of whatever is tied to a child dying. I do think that every legislator I've interacted with is concerned about the vulnerable children in the state. And the problem is identifying what can be done to strengthen the family that is supporting the children, or identify those families who are a risk to the child so that those children can be removed and placed in families that can meet their needs. So I think that the notification is just the first layer of what needs to be identified in that. But you do need to be notified timely, because in your community, you're the leaders of your community, and your community is going to reach out to you to say what happened and what can we do to keep this from ever happening again. And so I do think timely notification is important.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, people did ask me, although I do not represent that area, but I grew up there. What took so long? Like, it was like, okay, so it occurred this day, and it just came out. And I had no response to that. And I would like to ask you to help us figure out what that needs to look like. Like what, because I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but there needs to be a system in place where we are notified. And it doesn't have to be onerous. I mean, we could receive a text message or email.
Well, right now, I am the system.
Okay, I know.
So
but
when I get an email, I pass it on. I think what you're asking is, should that notification be through me? I mean, I don't think I'm the delay.
No, you're not the delay.
But the question is when that notification should be triggered, is the question.
That is the question.
And the department is notifying me that they're investigating. I'm not notifying the legislators, because that's not what the law says. The law says when the death occurred due to abuse or neglect. So the question is whether or not you want to be notified that there is a death that is being investigated, or whether you want to wait until there is a conclusion of that investigation.
And I would say I want to know when it's being investigated. I want to know that there's been a death. And then I would like to find out the conclusion afterwards, because I want to be able to follow up, because the time frame by which now that could take, right? I'm learning that now, that it's not going to be something that happens overnight. Then I want to make sure that whenever it's concluded, I know the final results. I want to know when the investigation is started. So again, if we want to, we can reach out to the family. We can ask the questions that the community is asking us. We can look at services that.
Also say it's being investigated.
Yeah.
And right now you don't know that.
Right. But right now, we can't say too much of anything because we didn't know. But to answer your question, I want to know at the beginning. I do. Yeah.
Need to amend.
Yes, we would. We would, again, because Senator Jackson Andrews was upset because she found out 10 months later, right? But we still are not finding out in a timely manner. And in this case, we still possibly would not know in a timely manner, although we can kind of make our own judgment, but we don't really know until we get the facts. Dr. St. Germain?
Senator Barr, when you first started your comment about this case, you hit on a thing that many nurses wonder about, and that is children who are born to families that we never know about, or when they leave the hospital after birth, they become hidden. And so on a bigger scale, it's just looking at the whole maternal child process, and maybe there's a group that could jointly get our recommendation that somewhere we have to be that safety net from utero to death.
Yeah.
And so when we don't know about these kids, like you said, is how did somebody not know this child's not going to school or never seen a pediatrician?
Yeah.
That is the age-long problem that we have always struggled with. And parents have parental rights, but at some point, do we step in to be that safety net? I don't know the answer. I don't know that answer.
Well, I do know that there is a subcommittee of the Children's Cabinet Advisory Board that addresses the support services available for infants and maternal infant health and mental health. And one of their recommendations is the Nurse Visiting Partnership. But those programs are limited. They're costly and they're limited.
And I appreciate that. I do see the more families that are homesteading and homeschooling has definitely increased since COVID. So I don't think it's an isolated incident. So just something to think about beyond what we're doing here today.
I think this has really opened up a whole nother issue. It just so happened that, unfortunately, this baby died, but there are other situations that probably are just as severe, just not have rose to that level, but they're not getting what they need, which is deeply concerning. Okay. So I would touch bases with you, Judge, on that cabinet so I can kind of see what they're doing to see.
that Dr. Henshaw is the chairman of that subcommittee.
Okay.
I'll connect the two of you so she can tell you what her subcommittee's doing.
Okay.
What kind of work.
Okay, thank you. Okay, wow. It appears that we are like right on my target time. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Ms. Wascom, I'm sorry.
Pertaining to the judge, so I was
Okay.
waiting my turn. I just have a follow-up question about the alternative responses. So if there is no parent culpability, they're referred out, is there a timeline in place where the caseworker follows up with the family to ensure that, like, the children are still safe?
Hold on, let me put you on. Okay.
I could get that answer for you. It may be different regionally, and I'm not sure if it's outlined in policy or not. So I will get that answer for the
Yeah, I
task
think
force.
that would be, like, that's my concern is, like, if a family is like, oh, no, I didn't know, and that a child would continue to fall through the cracks, to no fault of DCFS's, to be sure. But I think we've all witnessed, when children refuse to disclose or they don't want to blame their parent to protect them, that if there's follow-up, just to make sure that the child is still safe. That's just
Family
my-
doesn't need any services beyond that.
Yeah, I
Sure,
I
understand.
was just wondering if in policy, if there is a timeline, like, for them to follow up.
I'll get back with you on that.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay.
Will you send that to our staff so we can send it to everybody? Yeah. Sure, Dr. Birch.
One other question, just sort of thinking as we are building toward like future advocacy, are you guys collecting data around wait times and the ability to access services? I just kind of think about, like, as a mental health provider, and I often am making that case for funders, for Medicaid rates, things like that, like really trying to figure out where those levers are. I'm just thinking, you guys have just this wealth of information now as you're trying to connect families to resources. What is the
You're
average?
talking
Yes.
about delays in
Delays in
them
being
getting
able to
resources
access
and them
those
getting to
resources.
counseling and
Yeah. I'm just curious if that's a data point that you guys are tracking or if it's something
it's
that,
not, we can.
it'd be super
But,
interesting.
yeah,
and
because I agree
think-
with you when you brought it up, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, because I think we hear that too. I mean, we have folks who are on waiting lists for 6, 10 months, and at that point, right, you've missed the opportunity for early intervention, for even their willingness to actually follow through on the referral, things like that. And so, and we see, at least in the parish where I'm in, last week with all the SAMHSA, potential SAMHSA cuts that got rescinded, like we're seeing shrinking resource pools. And so I just think that data would be really powerful.
And along those lines, I'm kind of thinking, do y'all have like a map, like of the state, like of all the, like how many providers you have in this region, how many you have in this region? Is there like, do y'all have that map that?
I can get for you.
Yeah, okay. Because unfortunately, certainly when you get into the rural areas, that becomes a lot tougher.
A lot difficult.
Medicaid, there's an effort through the Department of Health and LSU, the Center for Evidence to Practice. And so they are working to get evidence-based practices to Medicaid, providers who take Medicaid. And they maintain a map of providers who accept Medicaid and have the specialty training to work with families who've experienced high levels of trauma or need specialized care. But again, the big challenge is that a lot of folks don't stay in it after they get trained because Medicaid rates are low, and it's hard to serve such high-need families and do evidence-based care when you're not being reimbursed at a rate that covers your cost. And so I think, but we do have some resources that are mapping that and some efforts at LDH. I'm on the advisory committee for that group. And so, but there are some efforts to really look at that and to try to figure out how we get those services out, especially to rural parishes where we do have like gaps in providers.
Is that something that you have readily available that you can send?
I can send that to the
Okay.
task force.
I
Just
would like to take
the
a look
map
at
and
that.
the
Yeah.
website tracks that, and who's trained in what in each parish.
Okay.
So
That would be very helpful, because maybe because when you talk about policies, right, talk about initiatives, talk about trying to fill and bridge gaps, it's hard to do that when we don't know exactly where, right? So there may be something that we can look at in some of these areas, and it may be something simple that could be recommended that we could possibly afford to do. And actually make that investment once we have taken a look at that, because it's extremely important, and it's amazing how those kind of investments can have such a great result and yield so much at the end of the day, and really address a lot of issues that we are talking about right now. Okay, so I don't think we have any additional questions, any comments? We have been working thoroughly, ladies and gentlemen, for the past, 8-9 months? Amanda? I don't think we missed a month. And so I let me just say thank you to many of you, because I have chaired other task force, and I think, to my knowledge, this has been one of the best attended, consistent attended, with the same individuals that I've ever chaired, and I don't take that lightly. That says a lot about each one of you, about this issue, your commitment to it, and I want you to know that I truly appreciate it. I know some days and some committee hearings have been extremely long, but you guys, you stayed here and you hung in with me and you hung in with us. And so at the end of the day, we are making great strides to ensure that our children are a lot safer, and making sure that they have the opportunity to become the best human being they can be, right? And that they are fulfilling their purpose. And so I just want to say thank you. I want you to know that our work is not done. We will need you as we begin to move these bills through the process. I would like to ask many of you to show up and testify about the importance of the bill and what we learned and gleaned through the entire committee process. And then when session is over with, we have more work to do. So I want you to know that I greatly appreciate each one of you, and I thank you for being here, being committed to the children of Louisiana, to our future, and making sure that they have a good path forward. So thank you, and I will take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
The captain make a motion. Thank you, Captain.